Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Samach Gimel. Bava Basra 63. Today's daf is dedicated for Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, Shmir for the Chayalim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. We go to Samach Gimel Amid Aleph 63a on the fifth line. The Gemara tells us Pshita, it's obvious. Amar Yachok Ploni Benitzai Palga, that if a person says Yachok Ploni Benitzai, it's obvious if he says that a person should get half of my assets, that means to say he's intending to give him Palga, he's intending to give him half. Well, let's say, so the word Yachok Ploni means I'm giving you half. Well, let's say he says Tenu Chelek Ploni. Let's say he says give a portion to Ploni Benitzai. Here he's using the word chelek, but it can mean half or it could just mean a small, minuscule amount. So what is the implication of that statement? So here he's using the expression of tenu chelek instead of yachlok. So Amar Ravina Bar Kisi Tashma, let's learn it from the following brisa. The Tanya, the brisa says, Omer tenu chelek uponi bebor. So it's the same exact lashon, same exact formulation. It says, give a portion. Good morning, Hobbs. Good morning, Hobbs. Boy, how are you going to get to school then today? Oh, you should have asked my son Shia. He drives. I'll let him know you're here. Good schmuck to you. We'll study the daf together. Okay, so he says as follows. We're on 63a, Hobbs. So the person says, we'll just start again for Hobbs. 5 lines from the top on 63a. A person says, Yachok Ploni Benitzai. It's obvious that if a person says, give Ploni Yachok. Yachok means half. That means Pago, you intend to give him half. But let's say he says Tenu Chelek Ploni. Let's say he says give a portion to Ploni. The word Chelek can mean half, like in Yachok, or maybe it can mean just a small, minuscule amount. So what does he intend to do? What is the implication of that statement? So Amar Avina Bar Kisi Tashma. Let's learn that from the following brisa. The Tanya Omer Tenu Chelek Ploni Bebor. If a person says give a portion of my assets in the bor, so he says the same exact lashon, tenu chelek uponi bebor. He says exactly the same formulation as on question. It's a perfect price on point. What would be the halacha there? How much of the pit, how much of the water in the well do you have to give? Do you have to give just a small amount, or do you have to give half the well? So sumchus omer, ein pachos miravia, ein pachos miravia. So sumchus, now we know sumchus's position throughout Shas is mamon hamutal b'sof cholkin, that money that's in doubt we split. We actually don't rule like sumchus. We rule hamotzi michavero alavaraya, that if you want to get money from somebody else, you need to give the proof. But sumchus rules that if the money's in doubt, we split it. And so even though we don't pass like sumchus, the Rabbanan don't argue with sumchus's reading of this brisa. So what does sumchus say here? You have to give a quarter, or not less than a quarter. Means because the we're not sure if it's a half or just a small minuscule amount. And so therefore, in this case, if you use the language of chelek, we're not sure what it means. And so therefore, it's either a half or just a small amount. And so therefore, Simcha says you give a quarter. And that's how the Rabbanan would read that lashon as well. And now, since we started down this path, the Gemara, the brisa fleshes it out, similar examples. The chavis, so let's say give some water for a chavis, which is for my animals to drink. Typically speaking, the animals would drink from quarter. A chavis is a quarter, so here it means ein pachos mishminis. We take the quarter, we split it in half, and that's an eighth. With kadera for a pot for cooking, and pachos miyud beis. So that's half of that is a 12th, and with tafiach for like your canteen, in pachos mishisha aser, it's 1/16. So the answer to the question is we're not sure, and the answer is that if you say chelek, it could give a chelek. It could either mean a quarter. I mean, it could either mean half or just a small amount, and so we're not sure. Tana Rabbana, and so now the Gemara introduces the following brisa: Ben Levi shemachar sadal Israel. So let's say you have a Levite who sold a field to an Israelite. The Levite sold the field to the Israelite. Amar lo, the Amar lo almanas shemaiser rishon shali, maiser rishon shalo. So a Levite who sold a field to an Israelite, and he said to him, I'm selling it to you on the condition that the Meiser Rishon of your field will be mine. The whole question, how is he able to do that? But let's assume for the circumstances, for the Daf Yomi, that the Meiser Rishon is actually going to be his under these circumstances. He's able to, that it will be valid Meiser. So a person says, I'm selling you my field on the condition that I retain the rights to the Meiser Rishon. Then we're going to say the Meiser Rishon goes to that Levite. Vim Amar Li Ulevanai. And if he says it will be belonging to me and to my children after me, then Mace, then once this Levite dies, Yitain Labanav. We'll give it to his children. Ve'im Amar Lo, and if he says to him, Kol Zman Shasadazu Biyadcha, I get this Meiser Rishon as long as you have this field in your possession, then we're going to say Machra V'Chazar V'Lakcha In Lo Lavkum. That if the guy who the Levite sold it to then sold it to somebody else and rebought it, then the Levite has no claim to it, because once he sold it, he gave away, the second person doesn't have to give the Meiser to the Levite. And now when the person buys it back from him, he bought all the rights that the second person has. And so therefore the Levite has lost his claim to the Meiser. The Gemara asked a question about this. Amai, why is this a valid transaction? Why does he get the Meiser Rishon? We have a fundamental principle. Ein adam makne davar shelo ba'la olam. This is a very important topic throughout the Shas, and is the fundamental principle that a person is not able to sell or purchase something that's not yet in existence. And since this Meiser was in the future still to be planted, and so if that's the case, how is he able to sell it? You can't sell something that's not yet in existence. Why are you not able to sell something that's not yet in existence? So there is a couple of explanations, but the main one is that it's a lack of gemirus das, meaning to say gemirus das means full intent. The person who's purchasing it does not really have the full intent to buy it because he doesn't see it. And so therefore you can't really purchase something that's not yet in existence. This would, of course, be in conflict with some major financial transactions where people speculate on future stocks and they buy in and trade all the time. But our Shah says, well, if that's the case, how are you able, you had a question, Hobbs? If that's the case, how is he able to sell this transaction, but not the Meiser Sheni, that he retains the Meiser Sheni for himself? The Gemara answers, and now we'll see why this price is relevant to our sugya. Kimin the Amrle Amanas Shemaiser Rishon Shali Shiure Shire Lamako Meiser. No, he didn't sell it to him and then acquire back the Meiser Rishon. That's not what was going on. Since he said this idea of Almanas, it's like a condition. Basically, he said, I'm selling to you on the condition that I'm retaining this Meiser Sheni for myself. And it's as though he did like a form of sharecropper. So basically, this also makes it difficult to understand how this works as Meiser to a Levite. But we'll leave that question aside, understanding the technical way, and this is valid Meiser. Basically, what he's basically acquiring is what's called Tovas Hana, the right to, you have the right to give the Kohen or the Levite, the Truma or the Meiser to whoever you want. So the Levite is basically acquiring that from this person. He says, you have to give it to me. So basically what he said is, I've held back this, and he's able to sell something and hold it back. So that's the basic assumption. So says Reish Lakish, we're going to learn from here, says Reish Lakish, the following. From this law, Reish Lakish says we're going to learn another law. Zosomeres, we learn from this principle, from the fact that you can make this conditional clause and hold something back, then I'm mocher bias lechavero. Somebody sells a house to his friend. The Amar Lo, and he says to him, Amanas shed Yuta al Yona Sheli. And he says, I'm selling this to you on the condition that this upper Diyuta, this upper level is mine. I'm selling this to you on the condition that this upper level is mine. Then we're going to say Diyuta al Yona Shelo. He says, Reish Lakish says, we learn from here, if somebody sells a house to his friend, he says on the condition that this upper level of the house, i.e. the rooftop, which has its own wall around it, is mine, meaning I haven't sold it, then the Yuta al Yona Shelo, then indeed he retains the upper level. And the Gemara asks the question, why does Reish Lakish have to teach us that this conditional clause helps? Like, what's the value in this conditional clause? Even if he hadn't stipulated that when I sell the house, I'm not selling you this upper rooftop. In those days, the rooftop was viewed as a totally separate structure. Even if he didn't do that, it would have been excluded from the sale. So why is Reish Lakish teaching us that if you put this clause in, this conditional clause, then the Yuta is excluded? It's anyways obviously excluded. So that's the question. So and why is Reish Lakish saying this? We go back. So Reish Lakish is saying this. He's saying this brisa that taught us that any stipulation which doesn't add anything, unless you leave something out from it, from that we learn that if you sell a house to your friend and you exclude something, it's going to be excluding the upper level. Meaning to say, when you exclude something, it's excluding something in addition to the normal exclusions. So here too, Reish Lakish must be saying that if you excluded the diyuta from the sale, it can't be that you're excluding the diyuta, because the diyuta would anyways have been excluded. So it must be that you're excluding something else. And what are you excluding? So this is on the top of 63b. This is a dispute between Rav Zvid and Rav Papa. Rav Zvid says, "Shem ratza lo tzibo zizin motzi." You've allowed yourself the right, because you put in the contract, I'm not selling you the upper level. I have the right now to make projectiles coming out from the upper level, wedges or poles to hang stuff on. So therefore, that's the right I take for myself, that I have the airspace in the courtyard. And Rav Papa says, Shem Ratzal no Sali al Gaba Bona. No, Rav Papa says, no, you've retained the right that, let's say that upper level fell down, you'd be allowed to rebuild it. Bishlamo Rav Zvid. So according to Rav Zvid, that's why it states Hainu de Katani Zosomeris. According to Rav Zvid, it makes sense why Reish Lakish uses the language of Zosomeris. That's why Reish Lakish says we're learning from this brisa that talks about the Meiser Rishon, that you excluded, that if you sell the field to your friend on the condition that you're keeping the Meiser Rishon, that this extra language helps to retain for yourself the place that you sold. Because logically, we wouldn't assume that you could do that. Ella Rav Papa, who says that the extra language does not help to retain for yourself a place in the space that you sold, but rather it's allowing you to rebuild something. My Zosomeris. What does he do with the language of Zosomeris? So the Gemara says, Kasha, it's difficulty according to Rav Papa. So Amarav Dimi Minar Dai. Hi man, the Mezaben Le Lechavre, the Mezaben Le Beito Lechavre. But now we're basically going to continue to explore this idea of if you have unnecessary language in the contract where something was already basically included or excluded from the sale, that we're saying that language must teach us something else. It's not redundant. It's not there for no reason. It's there to teach us something else. So we have the following: a person sells to his friend a house, afagav the cost of like umkavaruma, even though he wrote, I'm selling you the omek, the depth, and the roma, I'm selling you the below space and the above space. He still has to write. I'm selling you meaning to say, if he wants to include, if he just writes umko and rumo, he's not including the well and the cistern. If he wants to include the well and the cistern that are on the property, he has to also write mitahom ara ad rom rakia. He has to include that language from the depths of the ground until the heights of the heavens. What's the reason? My timer to umkavaruma bestama lokani. Because if you just write umkavaruma, the airspace and the floor space, or below the subfloor space, that doesn't acquire for you the wells and the pits and the cisterns. So ahani umkavaruma lemipne umkavaruma, ahani mitom aravad romakil lemipne bor vados umechilos. When you say the expression umkavaruma, that just refers to allowing you to basically have the airspace of the courtyard or to dig tunnels in the courtyard. But when you say mi umka, when you use this expression mitahom arad romakia, that's what's going to allow you to dig a well. So basically, if you just add in this language of umka viruma, that does not include a well that you're allowed to dig. You no longer have the right, you still don't have the right to dig the well. You have to add in this extra language of mitahom ara. So the Gemara asks, Lema Messiah, let's give a proof to Rav Dimi. Let's bring a proof, says the Gemara, because it says in our next Mishnah, Veloas abor veloas ahados aval pisha kasav umka veruma. And if you sell a house, you have not sold the well and the cistern, even though you wrote umkavaruma. Even though you write this expression umkavaruma, you have not sold the well and the cistern. So therefore, and if you're going to say that as a baseline, you have sold the well and the cistern, then if that's the case, umkavaruma. If you want to say, as a baseline, if you don't specify anything, you've acquired the wells. If you want to say that as a baseline without specifying anything, you've acquired the right to dig a tunnel and to build an airspace, then when you put in umkavaruma, that would be an indication that you've acquired the well and the cistern. And so we see from here that that's not the case. And so therefore, when you write umkavaruma, that's not to teach us about the well and the cistern. That's to teach us that you have the right to do the tunneling and the flooring. So therefore, this is a proof for Rav Dimi Ardai, who says that Kvaruma doesn't teach you about the wells. It only tells you that you've acquired the right to dig subfloor and the airspace. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. The Gemara pushes away. No, we're talking about a case, the low cost of way. We're talking about a case where the contract does not say Kvaruma. And so therefore, that's why it doesn't include the well and the cistern. But if it had written Kvaruma, then it would have included. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? The Mishnah says, the next Mishnah says, even though he wrote the well and the cistern, even though he wrote that specifically, he has not acquired it. So how can you say it's talking about a case where he didn't write it? So the Gemara says, no, this is what the Mishnah means. This is what the Mishnah means. Even though he didn't write Kavarumo, Kamisha Kosov Dami. Even though you don't write specifically, I'm selling you the Umka and the Rumba, it's as though it was written, and you automatically, when you buy something, you've acquired the right to tunnel and to build above it. But Lemitna bor v'dusu mechilos ikasav umka v'ruma kani v'lo kasav lo kani. But to acquire the well and the cisterns, then you have to write umka v'ruma. So it's not necessarily a proof for Rav Dimi. The Gemara says, let's bring another source for Rav Dimi. Again, what's Rav Dimi's position? Rav Dimi's position is that if you just write umka v'ruma, you have not acquired the well and the cistern. The Gemara says, it says in the earlier Mishnah, in our Mishnah, it says, that you have not acquired the roof at a time when there's a fence there that's 10 tefachim high. That if you sell a house, the person who bought it has not acquired the roof if there's a fence around it. Says the Gemara on the top of 64a, Bistama Kani Umka. And if you want to say that as a baseline, you've acquired the Umka the Ruma. If you want to say as a baseline, you've always acquired the airspace. What do we care if it's 10 tefachim high? Why have you not acquired it? As a baseline, you've acquired the airspace. So don't we learn from here that as a baseline, you don't acquire anything. And as a baseline, also, you have not acquired the depth. And so this is the point of Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi is saying, Varuma is teaching you that you've acquired the depth and the airspace. And isn't that like our Mishnah that says that you haven't acquired the roof? So the Gemara, so this is therefore a proof for Rav Dimi. The Gemara says, no. Kivin the Gavoa Sar Tfachim Chashiv. Since it has a space of 10 tefachim high, it's its own unit. But as a baseline, and therefore you don't acquire it, but as a baseline, you would acquire the airspace above. It's just if there's 10 tefachim wall around it, then we say it's its own special unit. Gemara says, Amrle Tashma, the Amrle Ravina or Ravashi, Tashma. So Ravina is going to say to Ravashi, I'm going to bring you a proof from Rav Papa's explanation, not like Rav Dimi. I'm going to stop the recording here. We'll continue on because this is really the end of today's daf. So let me stop the recording. So